Right, well, we'll get going. Hopefully I have slides in a second. Yes, here we go. So first of all, I want to thank Rachel for bringing me and others here. It's a pleasure to finally make it to an open air meeting after many years of respect. I want to start by telling you about my dad. Here's my dad at his house, his garden that he's deeply invested in, and his hobbit window that you can look out from his front door across the beautiful green valley that he lives in. This is not my dad now. My dad's post-prostate cancer. About 4 weeks ago, my sister rang me up and said, "Dad's cancer's back, but they're not doing anything about it." And I'm like, how could that possibly be? Prostate cancer coming back is the least surprising thing in the world. But I was going over to New Zealand a couple of weeks ago, where my dad lives, for an HL7 New Zealand meeting and to catch up with family. And the day that I arrived, my sister rang up and said, "Dad's in hospital because the symptoms are out of control." And so I rang Dad, and he wasn't very with it. And the story he told me was a shock, because it was clear to me that his cancer was roaring back and they were doing nothing. And he had just been discharged from the hospital because they gave him an emetic and tramadol and kicked him out. And I'm like, and he's got no referrals to any urology or oncology. Like, how can this be such a mess? And so the next day he was back in hospital again, and I managed to make it down and visit him in hospital. And so he had all sorts of lab tests showing that he had bone metastases. He had all sorts of symptoms showing that he had bone metastases. There was no question about this. And he showed me an email from his GP to an endocrinologist, CC Dad, saying these symptoms are puzzling. And I'm like, what on earth is puzzling about these symptoms? And the answer is his PSA was not elevated, for those of you who know prostate cancer. And so the doctor had dismissed prostate cancer as a cause, because PSA would be elevated if it was. And of course it is prostate cancer. The doctor had referred him to an oncology service, but because the oncology service didn't have his data, because Dad lives in a different zone of the healthcare system, which is a big deal in New Zealand, from the GP, the referral had got lost in the ether because they didn't have access to his data to understand that he needed care. And so I'm sweating on this because it's a mess. And Dad wanted me to meet his hospital consultant. And the hospital consultant walked in, and I looked at him, and here's an HL7 New Zealand member that I know. I mean, you would not think, would you? But the thing is, he looked me in the eye and said, "I will make sure your dad gets the follow-up he needs." And he mostly did. He called me a week later, and he said, "Your dad has a referral to the oncology service. It will happen in 6 to 8 weeks' time." It's like, I cannot do anything about that. But the reason it took him a week to call me is because he spent most of the week chasing data. Dad's got nodules in the lungs. So does that mean he's got metastases in the lungs? No, because they have not changed since 2016. It just hammered home to me. I won't talk any more about it. Just hammered home to me what it is that we do. We are a long way from where we should be. This is particularly bad because of some things that have happened in New Zealand that are playing out in my dad's life, and his life will be shorter because of those things. But those things happen everywhere. And this is the thing that we're doing. So one of the things that I talk about is HL7 has historically adhered to the first definition of interoperability. The ability of two or more systems to exchange data and do something with the data, like who cares? And I've been trying to push HL7 to the second definition, the ability of two or more clinical teams or services to exchange patients or care staff and plan and provide care without gaps. My dad is in the gaps right now. Well, this is my goal. It matters. And it was reinforced to me in the last 2 weeks why it matters. And honestly, if I wasn't who I was, Dad would be even more in the gaps than he is. So, we have a lot of work to do between us all. One thing is for sure, we're never going to run out of work. Now, our goal here, now what we are doing in order to serve the goal of clinical interoperability is building digital public goods. Digital public goods, as defined here, this is a direct quote from Wikipedia, is actually a World Bank idea that they're trying to push really hard now to countries around the world, both lower middle income countries and also countries that are rich enough to know better, to actually build public infrastructure in the form of digital public goods. The definition is pretty straightforward. It's interesting that they use the word cultural, but free cultural works in this digital content that are intended to contribute to sustainable national and international digital development. For me, there's two parts to these that are key. One is they are about economic freedom for countries, from other countries, and also they are for personal freedom. So I want to give a call out that once the sessions start, Rory and I are running a session about digital wallets. It's not at all about standards and openEHR, but it's about consumer access to information, healthcare information, and digital public rights and human rights. If you're interested in those, join us for that session. All right. But there's one really interesting thing that I've learned from this process as I travel around the world, which is the critical role of a non-governmental organisation, an NGO, because if a government or a vendor or an institution sets out to build digital public goods, they will fail. I've never seen it work anywhere in the world because they are institutions, and institutional priorities get in the way of openness, get in the way of honesty, get in the way of building what you need to build. In my experience, it needs to be mediated by an NGO. It needs to be driven by institutions, but it needs to be mediated by an NGO. And NGOs such as openEHR and HL7 and others are therefore critical in that space. A key challenge for us then is to be mature and reliable partners. And that's one of the organisational challenges that Rachel works on and that Chuck at HL7 has been working on. He's resigned and retired as of the end of this year. But those are challenges for us to build out that reliability and reproducibility, and that really matters to the partners. There's no point coming and saying, well, we need an NGO, turning something over and the NGO just disappearing off and not producing anything. All right. But nevertheless, creating a standard, creating an NGO is a huge risk. This dropped early in the phase of doing fire, and it was bang, and I keep it on my wall at home. If you set out to do a standard, you are probably doing a bad thing. Actually, standards are more likely to fail than startups. 90% failure rate, but standards don't fail in the same way because they always get published because someone's got the energy to get them through the process. They just don't get adopted. To actually get a standard adopted is super hard work. And honestly, if anybody actually understood the process from where I sit at the other end of the process, they would never start. And I would never have started if I had any idea what was going to happen to me. So it's really important to be naive and idealistic because you won't do it otherwise. And so Standards is full of people who are naive and optimistic. All right. And the single most important thing about Standards, that far eclipses anything else that I had told and I learned at the hands of Kim. There's a few people in the audience who met Kim, I know. Kim came and joined my company and we created a standards-focused startup that was with the goal of providing tooling and community building facilities to accelerate the adoption of standards. This is back in the HL7 V3 days. It was a disaster at that level. But what Kim taught me was that community matters. And it's the single most valuable asset, and it's what I have done my best to build over the years. Because HL7, he said to me, HL7 has the community, it doesn't know what to do with it. And openEHR too had a community it didn't really know what to do with, and for a lot of years didn't, but now now working really well. Congratulations to all of you and Rachel. But you can't build that community without a rock-solid commitment to transparency, to accountability, to super amounts of high-energy work on building the community and building the trust that builds the community. And then, when you do that, you have to struggle with this. This is Tuckman's stages of group development, although most people just know the names: storming, forming, norming, performing. And this is the stage that every human organisation I've ever seen, churches, sports clubs, political parties, standards bodies, NGOs, my local kinder committee that my wife used to run, you go through this phase of the way people interact. And different people enjoy different parts of this. Believe me, I like the very start of this process, love it. But other people are like terrified of the start because it's, rough and tumble. And really, lots of people in the standards who love the end here. They love when it's all sorted and they know what to do and they can just go. But unfortunately, this is actually not what happens. Instead of performing, you get conforming. And your performance is all over the place because everybody's arguing about the rules. This is not the rules. And actually, the challenge for all organisations that I've ever found is managing that part of the process. So you have to formalise your process. You have to norm your values into a process. Otherwise, you will stop existing. But as soon as you do that, the norms take over. And you have to match those norms very carefully to your values, to your goals. But once you have done that, then you can conform to your rules, and that serves you really well. And one of the things you need as a standards development organisation is to match the weight of the process to the value of the community and the value to the community. Now, we have standards running through HL7 where they're developed by a group of people who share a common employer, just different departments of the common employer. It's a big employer, one of the biggest in the world, it's the US government. But they share a common employer, they socialise with each other, they share an enormous amount of shared code. Their kids marry each other. This happens. And the kind of standards, the kind of consensus building infrastructure they need is totally different to a national standard developed under political pressure where there's genuine contention about what you're even doing. See the European health data space, right? You need a really heavyweight process that everybody understands and is vested in, and it costs millions of dollars. But if you think that you can do those problems with the other problem solution, you'll get in a mess. And so one of the things you have to do then is have this sliding scale of consensus building activities. You also need to have space somehow in your organisation for rebirth, renewal. When I did fire through HL7, it was very much a palace revolution. We had people peeved off with us because we were breaking the rules. We had people doing their best to convince the board to kill the project because it was not what we were doing. It was not conforming to the norms that we had built. I deliberately broke them. and there has to be space in the organisation to do that. And the single most important thing for an organisation once you are in the performing phase is to decide when it's time to rebuild. I don't have a proper answer because I might have been wrong about fire. I don't think I was. I think we have enough evidence to say that I wasn't wrong to do fire. But it didn't feel like that sometimes during the early phase. But there's another thing that comes with this phase of performing or conforming, which is the tribal thinking. That is best summarised by the phrase, if you're not working with our norms, you are against us. And that is not the case. We need to collaborate. The problem space that we have is so big that we cannot solve it individually or organisationally individually. We must work together. And yet working together is actually a significant challenge. It works as well as a three-legged race. And it's quite common to see us fall over when we try. And it requires real effort, and it's the actual standards value proposition lived out. Because the whole point of a standard is to forego freedoms in one place to get freedoms in another place. Or maybe benefits, but you forego benefits. And so you constrain your behaviour. Now, some standards you constrain your behaviour simply to constrain your behaviour, and the intended benefits never materialise. And they're dead. Although sometimes they're zombie standards because they have some body supporting them that isn't responsive to market feedback, going, this is a waste of time. That happens too. But working together is a really hard decision. There's two things that pull you apart, because when you work within an organisation and within a set of accountabilities, you have some confidence that your concerns and priorities will be listened to. When you actually start working with a separate organisation with separate accountabilities, then that organisation can turn around and go, actually, your things are not important to us, and we're just going to orphan your interests. And so being part of collaborating is constraining your behaviour for other people's benefits. But that's the standards process. If you as a standards generator can't live out the value proposition of standards, you really can't convince people that you should actually look after their standards. People have asked me, why am I so invested in working with the openEHR community? For you in the room, you won't ask that question, right? But other people have asked me that. Why are you so invested? And they've gone looking for why I might be so invested. But the answer for me is brutally simple. Live our values, or we don't have them. And yet, it still doesn't become easy. Life cycles, another huge thing that drive us apart. I've got to publish something next month, and you won't get to the bit that I really need for another 6 months. I'm stuck. Life cycles, I've learned, I'm totally misunderstood or underestimated the challenge of life cycles. So these things are hard, and there's no simple solution. But we can't do everything, and if we try and do everything, then we start running into each other, and it's just a problem. And it brings to mind a saying that they told me in Africa when I was there last year. If you want to go fast, go by yourself. But if you want to go far, go with other people. And it's the standards value proposition. All right. Now, the other thing that I need to tell you about is about open licensing. It was a big deal when we pushed fire through HL7 with an open licence. In fact, the board decision where the board affirmed that fire would be open licensed, the vote was 6-6, and the CEO cast the casting vote in favour of an open licence. The nearest fire came to failing that vote. And as I walked out of the board meeting at which we made that vote, the managing director of HL7 said to me, you had a great thing with fire, but you just ruined it. It was controversial. It wouldn't be controversial to you here, and it totally wasn't controversial to all sorts of people. It was like, well, it have to be, but it was controversial. And so through that decision, we have moved, and the success that it generated, my life went crazy, and it's never gone back to normal since. And more people have looked at that and said, no, we have to go to open license. And there's only one or two high-profile standards organisations that are holdouts against open license standards. ISO, we need to hit them over the head till they get this. Thank you. And also, of course, SNOMED, but you can clap for that one too, okay? But I want you to know that open sourcing standards commits you to a broken business model, right? It's broken. There's no way to gather the amount of money that you need to support the community if you're giving your standards away. I am a firm believer in standards, in open standards, but I accept as a corollary that HL7's business model, and therefore my income, will be permanently broken. I live at the pleasure of my sugar baby, which is the US government, which hasn't seemed very pleasurable this year, but I have survived. But this is a good thing. You've got to think about this the right way, but it's a good thing. Imagine that Rachel and Sam and David Ingram, in their extremely estimable capacity, were summoned before the G8 and actually sat down with the G8 leadership and made the very simple case that illness care is an entirely negative contribution to GDP and the biggest consumer of GDP, that anything that you want to do to reduce the cost and the benefit to either society's economics or happiness requires data, and it requires open data. This is a really straightforward argument. And they heard that and they said, what a compelling argument. We are going to put together a body across the G8 that will create and put $500 million a year to standards for healthcare data. I mean, I think that would be like a manageable economic proposition from their point of view. But actually it would ruin us, because that much money flowing into standards would guarantee that all of us would be wiped aside by the big consultancies and the big companies and money flowing, and this money's going to go in all directions, and the people whose hearts are in it are going to just disappear. It is for us that the standards process is broken, because then we can do it, because we believe in it. So, as much as I believe that we should have more money, both, all of the participants need to be able to be better funded, it's a totally two-edged sword. All right. So, this is the standards formula. Open community in a non-governmental organisation. Publish open standards. Maintain a sliding scale of formality. Use social media hard. Collaborate with other standards organisations, and be faithful to your community. This is the formula for building what we need in the future from the grains of sand of the current and the past. But sometimes transformative change happens. Sometimes it comes and we can't predict it. Although right now we can predict one of them. International political changes have been a bit of a surprise this year, but they are not really a challenge to the formula I just showed you. They're not going to change anything there. They'll make some, adjustments and some life difficult and set us back a few years or whatever. But they won't change that formula. AI, on the other hand, has the potential. And from the beginning of the Gen AI revolution, people in and outside HL7 have been saying to us, well, why do we even need structured data standards anymore? You're completely wasting your time. Maybe everything I've been doing for 15 years is a total waste of time. And we took that seriously. Maybe it was. And maybe some of you heard that we ran an AI-mediated interoperability stream in Pittsburgh a few weeks ago to just forget standards, just use AI to do interoperability. So maybe we don't need data standards. And we had a good, hard think about that, but for me, the last this year has settled the matter. There's a unique thing about healthcare. Like, I was arguing with Qantas the other day. I went on their support website and actually started a chat and started chatting with the Qantas bot, right? It's AI. The thing about the Qantas bot is maybe 1% of customers, it shafts them. It just completely misunderstands them and completely screws them over. What do Qantas care, right? It's not like you can go somewhere else. You're not going to be coming back to Qantas grinding your teeth. It's fine. But if you're a hospital and you completely muck a patient up and they die, then it's not consequence-free. The long tail matters in health, and it's bigger in health. It's not 1%. It's like 10, 15, 20%. We all know that. And you can't ignore it. It's there in your face. You've got to deal with it. And you have to deal with it well. And that makes everything about health harder. There's parts of health that you don't have to have that equation, so we can easily AI them. But for the bits that matter, the bits that contribute to the bottom line, we need every bit of agreement that we can get to get as much out of AI as we can. That's my conclusion. In fact, I think now that if we got out of the way of the AIs and we let them all conspire with each other, the first thing they do is come up with AIs with data standards so that they could scale. Now, it may not be that it's a human problem anymore, but unless we're prepared to cede everything to the AIs, we need to stay in control of the data standards that they're going to use for human freedom. So for me, the importance of our work, and I don't mean HL7's work, I mean our collective work in standardising healthcare information and healthcare pathways and knowledge is the fundamental limit on our future. And so AI won't make that irrelevant. It will make it more and more important. And Dan, the Chief Standards Officer at HL7, his catch cry, which you're welcome to adopt, is HL7 standards are jet fuel for the AI era. But it does have some consequences for us. First of all, we clearly need to be much more invested in quality processes, double-checking AI output. We need, as humans, to scale our ability to QA check decisions made by AI. That's increasingly what I am as a programmer, is a reviewer of Claude. And it's actually much more cognitively challenging than actually just writing the code, because it comes at me, blop, here it is, rather than rising out of my mind over hours. And so that will become increasingly what standards and archetype development will be, is dealing with what AI throws at us and governing that. Now, one of the things about the work that we did in conversational AI in Pittsburgh, which a lot of people don't understand, and I thought I'd mention, is it's about the long tail of interoperability that none of us are ever going to standardise, but we all need, but we can only consider taking that on with AI because we have the infrastructure we have built to build it on. And there was a lot of misconceptions around this, because people are like, we don't need any of those things. No, we can think about doing these things because we've already done all those things and we need to do more of them. But I am doing things, but one thing that's clear then is that humans augmented with AI are much more productive, and you should all be much more productive already because of AI. But that increases the load on the contention points, the consensus building points, the standards process. We're already feeling that in HL7. It increases the load both socially and technically. And one of the things I have to figure out to do is that now people are using MCPs to connect up our publication infrastructure with their production healthcare infrastructure. That's totally unexpected to me from a year ago. And somehow I have to provision what was intended to support a few hundred people authoring standards for mass, semi-production usage. I don't know how I'm going to deal with that, but we have to do that. But the standards process becomes mission critical, whatever that process is. So I think that's the impact of AI that it's going to have on us, is just to increase the load, the cognitive load on our ability to agree with each other, which is the most precious thing. So I want to finish up by talking about what we're doing here. Our business is creating public treasure. We all own it, and we're all richer because we all own it. If any particular person or company or organisation or government owned it, it would be a hostage to them. We all own the treasure that we all own, and that's what makes it treasure. And I say to people to get involved in this process, either as undergrads to do health IT or as professional health IT workers, get involved in this process. First of all, it's challenging, it's puzzling, it's always going to be here. We will never master this problem. It's just immense. It pays well and it acts on social justice. This is a great thing to be doing. And for us individually, if you like living in a civil society, and I do, I really like living in a civil society. If you like living in one, it is built piece by piece by civil participation. And so this is a call for all of you to build civil infrastructure by participating in the construction of digital public goods. Many of you do, you're here for that. Some of you are here as learning, and I encourage all of you to spend a few hours a week or more, if you're crazy like me, contributing to public digital public goods, because the treasure in that compartment that we are building, in that chest, the treasure is our hearts. Thank you.
Questions? We can't go on without asking Grahame some questions. Have we got... Oh, yes, Connor. I'll pass you the microphone. Sorry, Luke, just get past him.
Grahame, at the beginning, near the end, you mentioned you had to scale your MCP server infrastructure because it's in the fast path of AI now. Is that the implication there? It's no longer something referred to by developers at implementation time, it's actually runtime.
Yeah, more and more people are hooking up the public validation infrastructure to their MCP servers and then running thousands and thousands of stuff, the AI just using it like a service. I think that's great, but I have to provision the background servers that do that, and they'll upload on them as boom. And that costs real money that I don't have. So I had to figure that out.
Any more questions? Thank you so much, Grahame. Really appreciate it.